Okay, so I'm playing a little bit of catch up here, but there is something about the Switch 2 that I haven't made a video about yet, and I really need to. And that is the one thing they are doing with the system that I just really do not like, and that's game key cards. This is a new push as part of the Switch 2 where a lot of games are specifically being marked as game key cards, where they are physical copies of the game that aren't really physical copies of the game. They kind of straddle a midline between a digital code in a box and a proper physical copy. The way this works is that the physical card itself does not have the complete game data on it. It might have no game data, it might have just part of it, and then once the card is put into the Switch 2, it'll then contact the eShop in order to download the rest of the data that it needs. Now, the one thing that is kind of nifty about this, so at least compared to like a digital code in the box, is that you don't have a code that is specifically linked to your Nintendo account. The card itself is acting as a license check, so you still have some of the benefits you'd get out of a physical copy, like being able to lend it to a friend, reselling it. It is a fully functional card in that respect. However, there are some downsides to this approach as well, namely the fact that whenever Nintendo Switch servers are down temporarily or eventually permanently, if you don't already have the game installed, the cart is useless. It's not going to do anything because it doesn't have a server to connect to download the game, which, look, honestly, is not going to be an issue during the Switch 2's main life cycle, but for people that like investing in physical copies of games because it's meant to last longer than the life cycle of a given system, that's a bit of an issue. And the thing is, I don't really have an issue with game key cards in and of themselves existing. It's something where I think it does make a lot of sense to happen for certain titles. For instance, maybe there is a game where the base install data is just too large to fit on the regular cart, so you have to rely on something like that. And this isn't even a whole brand new concept. We already see this happen with some physical copies of disc-based games on Xbox and PlayStation, and even the original Switch had some games that did have online downloads required, and you'd get a whole big banner on the box warning you that, hey, the full game isn't going to be on the cart. A good example of this being Starlink from Ubisoft. But my problem with them is not that they exist. My problem is the quantity with which we are seeing how many devs choose to release game key cards instead of proper physical copies. As far as we can tell right now, basically every third party is just hard leaning into using game key cards all the time. The only games that are offering true physical copies are Nintendo first party, thankfully. So if you're primarily getting the Switch 2 for their own titles like Mario Kart World or Donkey Kong Bonanza, nothing to worry about right there. And then the only other titles are a handful of games being published by Marvelous, like the upcoming Rune Factory Gardens of Ozuma, or Daemon X Machina Titanic Scion, and then of all things, a game that you would think would maybe have to be a game keycard situation, Cyberpunk 2077. That's it. Every other major third party is releasing things as game key cards as far as we can see right now. Capcom, Sega Atlas, Square Enix, Konami, all of them are releasing game key cards of their games, including in situations where it's a Switch 2 version of a game that has a release on Switch 1 that did get a proper physical copy. For instance, Suikoden 1 and 2 HD Remaster, that is a regular physical copy on Switch 1, and for Switch 2, it's gonna be a game key card. We don't really officially know why so many devs are leaning in the direction of these cards, but a very large part of it likely is cost saving. The new Switch 2 is relying on new cartridges for their games that do have higher transfer speeds than the ones on the original Switch, and that is likely something that has increased their cost. And as a result, in terms of anyone developing and releasing games for the Switch 2, if they have the choice between releasing things on a game key card that has minimal storage and just allows people to access the game versus paying to use, say, a 64 gig card that is considerably more expensive, yeah, it's a pretty appealing thing to go for that cost-saving measure, because at the end of the day, the more games they sell at a lower cost to themselves, the more total profit they're going to be making. And sadly, apparently those savings are enough where it's seemingly the obvious choice for a lot of devs out there. Now again, a big problem I have with this is just the general concept of actually owning proper physical copies of games. As someone who has always favored physical whenever it's an option over digital for their titles, it's not just simply this idea of liking to have a pretty box I can put on my shelf and point to and go, I have that game. But really a lot of it comes down to the idea that, yeah, I like the idea of having a physical card that is going to have the complete version on it, so that way, in the long run, as long as that card survives, it is a way for me to access and play these games, even if Nintendo's servers go down, even if they move on to some entirely new technology and system so many years down the line, this is going to be an option as long as I can keep things in running order. And I realize that is a long-term issue that doesn't really apply to the vast majority of people that are just looking to pick up a Switch 2 and play some brand new games on it. But I do think there is also an upfront cost to this approach as well that people need to be aware of, and that's how it's going to impact the storage options on the Switch 2. One of the things that's been really great about physical carts on Switch instead of using discs like with the PlayStation and Xbox is the fact that game data does not have to be installed on local system memory. There are so many games that if they're complete on the card itself, sure, you might have to download some things like patches every now and then, there might be some data that comes along with it, but it's never going to end up needing the full game install on the card, which allowed you to really not have to rely on increasing the Switch's storage as long as you were focused on physical copies of the game. Now, this didn't last super long on the original Switch because the problem there was that at least the initial models only had 20 gigs of storage, which was not enough. Eventually, DLC and stuff was going to just be too much for that to handle, but in the case of the Switch 2, where we're getting increased storage, that was potentially a benefit we were going to see, but definitely not anymore, because while it has 256 gigabytes to work with, which is a lot more than we had on the regular Switch, if every single game you're picking up outside of, the big first-party ones is going to now require a full install via the eShop because it's not really a physical game, it's just letting you download it in the first place, that's going to fill your storage up much faster. And also considering the fact that the new Switch requires more expensive, higher speed micro SD cards in order to expand storage on the system, that's going to be impacting a lot of customers much sooner than it did on the original system. This is a subject that I've ranted on quite a few times over the years in terms of physical versus digital, and I've always been of the opinion that, what we have right now in terms of both physical and digital existing at the same time and both being common options has been a golden age, because I don't think pure physical is a great situation either. I mean, all you have to do is look at how expensive some older retro games are to pick up now if you missed out playing and buying them way back in the day. But I don't love an all-digital future either, and while, yes, in a sense, there is a functional benefit to game key cards over just straight up digital codes in boxes, it still suffers from the same long-term issue that really worries me about shifting to all digital. And while Nintendo themselves are, again, thankfully having actual physical copies for their own games, if every other major third-party company is just going to be releasing game key cards from the start throughout the entirety of the Switch 2 lifecycle, that makes the Switch 2 a less appealing system to me for those games, especially if they're multi-platform. If I have the option of buying a game key card on the Switch versus an actual physical copy of the game for, say, PlayStation 5, and the entire game data is on the disc and I'm good to go, I'm now going to go for the PS5 version. And in the case of games where I don't have that choice, like Bravely Default Remastered, I might even just go ahead and grab it digitally because, for my purposes, there's not really any real benefit to the physical one anymore. It's just one of those things where I think you can try to pitch it as being the best of both worlds, but what it really ends up being is the worst of both. You have the limitations of a physical cart and the convenience of now needing to put the game in every time you want to play because it still has to do that license check, but you're also getting all the negatives of a digital version of the game, where it's taking up your internal storage, and again, the physical cart is effectively a paperweight should the servers ever go down. Overall, there are a lot of things about the Switch 2 that I am still excited about, and when it comes to their own first-party portfolio, I will be happily supporting everything they release physically that I can keep up with that system. But as far as the Switch 2 handling a lot of third-party titles and multi-platform stuff that I would have grabbed on the original Switch back in the day, even when it wasn't necessarily always the best performing version of a game, I just don't really have that same interest anymore. And I wonder how many other people are going to have that same kind of reaction over time. I have no illusions. People that prefer physical over digital are a dying part of the community. Most people now just buy digital versions of the games, and that's just the way the market is going. But I feel like there's still enough of us there would be at least some damage to where people are going to be choosing to pick up their games for these systems moving forward with these choices presented as they now are. So that's it. I just wanted to rant a little bit about the whole game keycard thing because it's really bothered me. It is just something about the Switch 2 that I am not a fan of, and I really am worried about the long-term library of the system and how many games just end up going this route over having true physicals. There is some degree of light at the end of the tunnel in that we have seen a lot of people express this opinion, and even some companies expressed interest in helping facilitate having true physical copies happen. Video Games Plus, for instance, has announced that that's something they would like to do, working with companies in the future, but who knows if anyone's going to actually bite and do that in the long run. we might see things like limited run presses of proper physical versions of the games for those who want them, but it's still, even if that were to happen, it's just not the direction I really want to see these things go. But anyways, let me know what you all think down below in the comments. Are you fine with game key cards? Are you planning to pick up your games this way? Are you just going to go all digital as a result, or not even pick these games up on Switch 2 as a result? Let me know down below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button to let me know. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you all later.